Hello and welcome to this tutorial video. Today I'm going to show you how to go about making a 5-point star using 72-degree diamonds. I'm going to take you through the steps for cutting, basting and stitching a star together. Then I'm going to show you how you can turn your star into a little block using 36-degree diamonds and how you can create a cute little coaster using felt for your tea. And you'll find the instructions on creating these stars in on my website as well. And there you will also find a pattern sheet for making this beautiful block using the 5-point star and the 36-degree diamonds. So I hope you enjoy this tutorial, and I just wanted to have a little side note just to say that I am filming this with all my family in the house. It's school holidays here, and so there may be a little bit of background noise. I've told everyone that I'm filming a tutorial and to please not disturb me, but you never know, kids will be kids. So let's get started with the tutorial. Okay, so first I want to talk about what you'll need to create these stars. Now we're using a 72-degree diamond shape, and I've got here a couple of different sizes. So the sizes that I stock in my shop, and I'll put a link in the description box, are 2 inch, 1.5 inch, 1 inch, 3/4 inch, and I also have 7/8 inch at the moment in stock. Now to make our 5-point star, as the name suggests, you will need to use 5 diamonds. Now this size here is the 1.5 inch, which is a really nice size. And this is a 1.5 inch, a 1 inch in comparison to the 1.5. Now, when we're going to make our little blocks to create our coaster, you're going to need a 36-degree diamond, which is this shape here. And you want the same size as your 72 degree. So this is also a 1.5 inch paper template. You can see that it fits there because we want the side edges to match. Now, some of the other things that you're going to need, or that I like to use in my English paper piecing, my needle, which is a milliner's size 11. And then I like to use Superior Thread's bottom line thread in colour Statue for my piecing. I also like to have some embroidery scissors for snipping my threads and for flicking out the papers. A good pair of fabric cutting scissors. You don't want a pair that is too big. This is a really nice size because you'll be doing a lot of cutting. And then I use the Sewline glue pen for all my basting. The only time when I switch to thread basting is if the shape is quite small, and I just switch to thread basting because I find the glue gets a bit messy. But for the sizes that we're working with today, I will be using the Sewline glue pen. Okay, so when you're cutting your fabric for your diamonds, the one thing that you just need to be careful of is the direction of your fabric. So for example, in this star, just move that out of the way, we have a stripe. So it's a very clear directional fabric. So when you are cutting your diamond, I don't have a piece of that stripe here, but imagine this was the stripe. You would want to make sure that you sit your diamond with the points going, the 2 furthest points going in the direction of that stripe. That's the same with any kind of directional fabric. For example, this fabric is a directional fabric, but with this one you could actually go either way. So you could do it the same direction, But this is a sort of fabric also that because you're only cutting a small area out and you're not seeing the whole pattern repeat, you could also, to save fabric, turn your diamond at an angle and cut it like that. So with an all over pattern fabric like this one that I have here, where there's not really a clear direction, we can cut our diamonds like this at an angle. This way you will save fabric, because what you'll do is you'll cut a strip and then I'll get 2 out of this strip. So when I'm cutting, sometimes I will cut strips if I know that I'm going to be cutting a lot. If I'm just working in a very scrappy way and I've just got a box of scraps next to me, I won't always cut in strips. So for example, when I'm in cutting strips, I've got a whole heap of strips that I've pre-cut here because I've been working on lots of samples with the diamonds. So I've worked out how wide to cut them, and then I have them all ready, and then I can sort of sit there. This is the wrong size, but I can sit there and I can just cut away. So sometimes it's handy to have them cut into strips, but it's not absolutely necessary. And it's not something that I always do. So when I'm cutting, I place my paper template on top of my fabric, and I like to make sure that I have no less than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I actually tend to go a little bit bigger and do a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to hold my fabric, my paper template onto my fabric, and then using my scissors, I'm going to eyeball the seam allowance. Once I've started, I can drop my paper template and I can cut that strip as straight as I can. Of course, you could use your rotary cutter as well to do this. And then I'm going to place my paper template. I want to make sure that I've got enough fabric at this end here so that I've got enough for the seam allowance. And again, I'm just going to eyeball that seam allowance and I'm going to cut along like that. Then I'll come back and I'll cut that little bit there. So there is my diamond. It doesn't have to be perfect because no one's going to see the seam allowance on the back. As long as you have enough seam allowance so that your fabric doesn't fray to the point where your stitching is, that's all you need to do. So there's another one. And so I'm going to cut 5 of those. Again, you can see that I'm just eyeballing it. It does not need to be neat or perfect. You don't want to have too big a seam allowance because that will add bulk to the back. It's just enough to ensure that nothing's going to unravel, that the fabric won't fray to a point where it comes all the way to your stitching. I find a slightly larger seam allowance of 3/8 inch also makes it just a little bit easier for the basting. So I need one more, but I'll cut an extra one that I can use in a scrappy project. You can see how nice and quick it is to do. Okay, so there we go. I've got one extra spare one. That also means I can pick and choose which ones I want. Okay, so now that we've got our diamonds cut, the next step is basting. Okay, so the important thing to remember when basting your diamonds is to always baste every single one in the same direction and the same way. And the reason we do this is so that these little flappy bits, or the little ears, all point in the same direction. And the reason we do that is to make sure that when we come to stitch them together, these little ears are going to nest and sit nice and neatly on top of each other. There you go. Just focus that bit. So you can see here that the little flappy bits are going to sit nice and neatly on top of each other, and they're going to nest together. So that's why we always baste in the same direction for each one. So I'll show you now how to baste. Okay, so you'll place your paper template on the wrong side of your fabric, and you'll center it so that you've got an even amount of seam allowance on all sides. And then with my glue pen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to baste two opposite sides first. So I'm going to do a line of glue just in from the edge of my paper template. I also like to do a little bit of glue on the fabric in the corners. And then I'm going to fold that over and press it down nice and neat so that I've got a nice crisp edge. And I'm going to come and do the opposite side. And I'm going to fold that down and press it down so I've got a nice crisp edge. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the next two sides. So I'm going to just rotate it a little bit and put my glue. Make sure you go over the fabric as well as the paper. And then I'm going to fold that down and smooth it out. Again, I want nice crisp edges and nice crisp points. And then the last side, glue on the paper and the fabric. Fold that over, press it down, and nice crisp edges. So you can see there. So you've got nice points and nice edges, and you can see on the back it's nice and neat. The two little ears are going to be going in opposite directions. So that's what we want so that we can nest them together. So now if I was to lay these out, and I'll try and do it so that it's opposite. So this is the back side. When they're all laid out, like so, all these little ears, they're all going in the same direction, and they're going to sit nice and flat on the back of my work. And I apologize because my phone doesn't seem to want to autofocus. So there we go. So I've laid them out and all these little points are sitting nice and flat on the back. Okay, so I've decided on the layout that I want my star. So now we're going to piece them together using a whip stitch. So I've cut a length of thread and I have a knot in the bottom. And I'm going to start with these two bottom stars. I'm going to stitch these together and then I'll add these ones on going anti-clockwise. So to piece them together, I'm going to pick up my two bottom ones and I'm going to fold one on top of the other. And then I'm going to make sure that the points are nice, matching, nice and neat. And I'm stitching from the bottom towards the middle of the star so that I can then stitch down the next side. So I'm going to come in the very tip there. And the first thing I'm going to do is a locking knot. So I'm actually going to go back in that same spot with my needle. And then with my thread, with the working thread, I'm going to go over and under my needle. And with the tail, I'm going to go under and around my needle in the opposite direction. And then I'm going to pull that, and you'll see it creates a figure 8 knot. And I use this knot to secure my work. I do this knot at the beginning and end of each edge that I stitch to secure all of my stitches. And then what I'm going to do is a whip stitch. With my whip stitch, I make sure that I'm going straight across the edge edge of the paper, not at an angle. I go straight across to make a shorter stitch, which means it's less likely to be seen on the front. So then I'm going to continue along doing the whip stitch all the way to the end. And I try and make my stitches even across the edge. A good rule is about 4 or 5 stitches per 1/4 inch. And you want to make sure that you're just picking up the fabric, you're not going through the paper. You should feel your needle sort of slide over the edge of the paper. So I'm going to continue all the way along. When I'm making my stitch, I'm pulling my stitch quite tight. Not so tight that I break my thread, but I want to have nice tight stitches. If your stitching is too loose, your stitches are likely to show on the front as well, and your piecing won't be as secure. So don't be afraid to make that stitch nice and tight. When I'm pulling my needle up, I'm actually giving it a little tug. And this thread that I use is really strong, so I've never really had it snap when I'm stitching. Now you can see as I've gotten closer to this end, this little ear that's sticking up, I've folded it back down so it's out of the way, and so that I can see where that point is. So I'm going to stitch all the way to the point, and when I get to the point, I'll do another locking knot. So there's my stitch. I'm at the point, so I'm going to stop here, do my locking knot, and then I've got my first piece stitched together. So now I'm going to add on my next diamond, which is this one. So again, I'm going to make sure that I've got it the right way. I'm going to fold that over. Then I'm going to turn my work around. I'm going to make sure that they're lined up. Now I'm just going to peel this seam back a little bit so that I can hold it flat and back and out of the way, so that I can get right into that point. So again, I'm going to go into that point, those 2 diamonds. I'm going to start with my locking knot. Pull that tight. And then I'm going to stitch all the way down to the other end, where I will do another locking knot. Okay, so I've gone all the way to the end and I've done my locking knot. Now I need to come back to the center to add on the next diamond. So rather than tying my thread off and snipping it and starting again, I'm going to run my needle and thread through the seam allowance on the back. So that I can come up to that point and be ready to stitch. Now I'm not concerned if this thread that I've run through the back gets cut and my stitch is unraveling, and the reason why I'm not concerned about that is because I've done the locking knot. So that locking knot has secured all those stitches between those 2 points. If this thread that I've run through now snaps, it's not going to unravel any of my stitches because of that locking knot. So next I'm going to put on the center diamond. So we're going to hold it there, make sure it's the right way, fold it over. Again, I'm just going to peel that seam back so I can get right into the point there. I'm going to go into that point, those 2 points of those 2 diamonds, locking knot, and then stitch all the way to the end where I will do another locking knot. My thread's starting to shorten now, so once I get to that other end, I will do my locking knot, and then I will also tie off my thread so that I can start with a fresh thread for the last diamond. It's always a good idea to try and finish a thread at the end of an edge, not halfway through the middle of it. If you're playing chicken with your thread, you can finish your thread in the middle of an edge. Just make sure that you do that locking knot and you tie it off. And when you start close to where you finished with another locking knot and continue stitching along the edge. Okay, so now we're up to piecing in our last diamond, and it does get a little bit tricky with the last one, but we're going to start the same way. So I'm going to make sure I've got it positioned where I want it, fold it over the top of the other one. Now I'm going to fold this one back on itself so that's out of the way. Now line it up, peel that seam back a bit. You just sort of have to fiddle and move the other sort of seams and diamonds out of the way. I've got that all lined up into the point of those 2 diamonds with a locking knot. And then I'm going to stitch all the way to the end. Now what I actually should have done, thought about it, is I should have started at this end and stitched down here. But it doesn't matter too much. It just means that I have to run my thread back to stitch the last seam. Okay, so I'm going to do stitching all the way to the end. Then I'll run my thread back to the center to stitch up the last seam. Okay, so now I'm ready to stitch up this last seam, and this is where it can get a little bit tricky because we have to sort of fold this and hold it together while we've sort of got this hard sort of bit here. So I'm going to line it up at the outside edge first and then manipulate it in the middle here. I've got my thread here at the center ready to stitch. So you can see how I'm holding it. So I'm going to go into that point, those 2 points of those 2 diamonds. I want to get it as close and into that point as I can. I'm going to do my locking knot. I'm going to do it nice and tight so that it draws all those points together. And do my stitch. And then I'm going to stitch all the way to the end. When I get to the end, I'll do another locking knot. And then I'll tie off my thread. Okay, so there is my finished 5-point star. It's nice and neat in the center and all the outside edges. And on the back, you can see how those little ears are all nicely nested and lined flat. Now it's important that you don't trim back these ears, especially on the outer edge here. If you trim these back, you risk creating a hole in the points and your fabric unraveling. Now I will keep the paper in until I have either attached shapes on these bits here, and then I can take this paper out, or I will wait until I'm ready to applique this onto something else. When I'm ready to applique, that's when I will then take the papers out. If you're going to applique the star just as it is, once you've taken the paper out, these little flappy bits, what you can do with those is put a little bit of glue on this point, and then you just fold it back on itself and press it down, and that way you'll have a nice crisp point when you come to applique it on. Okay, but so for us now, I'm going to show you how to turn this into the little coaster block. Okay, so to make our coaster, we need 36-degree diamonds in the same size, so 1.5 inch to finish the coaster. So I've got my fabric that I'm going to use here and my 36-degree paper template, and just like before, I'm going to hold my template on my fabric, and I'm just going to cut that 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch seam allowance so that I have my diamonds. Again, you want to leave enough at the end here for the seam allowance where the point is. And we'll cut 5 of those. Okay, so just like with our 72-degree diamond, we're going to baste our 36-degree diamond the same way. So again, we're going to baste them all in the same direction for every single one. And we're going to start with line of glue, fold it over, press down so nice and crisp. Then we're going to do the opposite side. Fold that down so it's nice and crisp. Then we're going to come back and do the last 2 sides. Folding and pressing. So that we have our diamond shape. Now again, don't trim back the ears, just leave them as they are. So there we have our diamonds, ready to piece onto our star. Okay, so to piece our diamond, I've got my needle and thread with a knot in the bottom. I pick up my first one, and we're going to stitch from this point to here and then up to this point. So we'll fold that back like that. And we want to make sure that this point is nestled nice and neatly with that point. And then you're going to come along here. We're going to start here. So I'm actually going to fold this seam back with my thumb a little bit so that I find that point there. I'm going to take my needle through that point. I'm going to do my locking knot. So, and then I'm going to stitch all the way to that inner point. Okay, so I'm coming close to that inner point now. I'm going to stitch all the way up to that inner point there, where I'll do a locking knot. And next I'm going to stitch up here. So for this, we're actually going to have to bend this diamond. So we'll have to bend it slightly like that. We're going to get that point nice and neat. Going to make sure that we've pulled our stitch nice and tight. And go into those 2 points, locking knot, pull that nice and tight, and then we're going to stitch all the way to the other point. Okay, so I'm almost at that point now. A few more stitches. And then right in that point, I'm going to do a locking knot. Pull nice and tight. And there is our first diamond attached. So now I'm going to move on to the next one. I'm going to fold that little ear back down. Get my next diamond. Line it up. And I'm going to fold that seam back. I'm going to come right into this corner, into the point. Do a locking knot. Nice and tight, right in that point. And then I'm going to do my whip stitch all the way back down to the other point. So then you'll continue on adding each 36-degree diamond until you have them all pieced to your 5-point star. Okay, so you can see here I've got 2 diamonds stitched now to this diamond piece here. So this means that I can actually now take this paper out because it's connected on all 4 sides. I'm just going to park my needle. I'm going to peel that seam back. And then I can flick that paper out. And now it means that I can fold this without damaging my paper as I stitch the next edge. Okay, so I finished piecing on all of the 36-degree diamonds. So now we can go ahead and remove the papers. So again, just going to peel those seams back and pop the papers out. Like so. Okay. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to address these seams that are sort of flapping open a little bit. Okay, so that it's easier to stitch this onto our felt backing, We just need to sort of reposition these outside edge seams so that they sit nice and flat. So to do that, I'm going to get my glue stick again. And what I'm going to do is just put a bit of glue back where those seams were folded and sort of fold them back down and press them down again so that they sort of sit in nice and flat. Okay, so that we've got our nice edge again. Now what I'm going to do when it comes to this point here at the corner, so that all these could sort of sit flat again, first thing I'm going to do is address the center diamond. So I'm going to put a bit of glue on that little ear and I'm going to fold that back down on itself, press that down. Then I'm going to address this one here. So what I'm going to do for that is I want to try and fold it back on itself as well and fold it down. So first I just need to put a bit of glue there, and then I'm going to put a bit of glue on this ear, and then we want to maintain that point, that nice point. So I'm just going to fold that down back on itself. And what I'm trying to do is maintain my crisp point there. So I'm going to fold that down like that. Press that down. Now come along here, bit of glue here. Just going to secure that seam down there. And then again, bit of glue on there. And again, we're going to fold this down. Sort of folding it back on itself. Now, it may take a little bit of manipulation, but what we're aiming for is to try and get this point on this side to be as neat and crisp as we can. It might not always be perfect, but we can get it pretty neat. So I'll continue along, folding and gluing those seams down. Might be, which way is that? Let's fold it like that. So it's just a matter of redoing those seams, folding them down neatly. So that we have our nice crisp edges, and to make it a bit easier to stitch onto our felt. Now it will create bulk in this point, but there's not much we can do about that. And again, we don't want to trim back those ears because we don't want to risk having holes in our points. So you can see by doing that, it's making it a bit neater on the front side. So I'll continue doing that until they're all fixed back down, and then it'll be time to stitch it onto felt. Okay, so I folded all my seams back down and fixed the points onto the back, like so. So now what I'm going to do is top stitch it onto a piece of felt. So I've got my felt here, and I'll place that down like so. You want to make sure that you leave enough felt around to trim back the edge. So what I tend to do is I'm just going to put a bit of glue here on the centers of these diamonds just to help keep it in place a bit. So just going to press it down like that. And then you can use pins, or I like to use sew tights, which is a magnetic pin, to just hold in place the piecing onto my felt. It just holds it nice and secure, but you could also pin. You could just use pins and pin it on. Now, to do the top stitching, I really like to use the Wonderful, or any, it doesn't have to be Wonderful, but a pearl thread. So I've got some here, I've got some solid ones, and I've got some variegated ones. So I'm going to choose two colors. I'm going to do one color for the center of the star. So I'm thinking I might use this variegated orange for that. And then for the outside, I'm going to use, not that one. I'm going to use that solid green, I think. Either the solid green or the variegated. I think I'm going to use the solid. So use one of each. Okay, so we're going to start with top stitching the center of the star first. And to do that, you can see in my sample here, I stitched around the inside edge of each of the diamonds. Just with a straight stitch. I try to keep my stitches and spaces as even as possible. And we're just going to stitch from the inside edge. So to do that, I'm just going to pull a length of my thread and have a knot in the bottom. Like so. Thread my needle. Okay. And to start, we want to bury that knot between the piecing and the felt. So I'm actually going to come up inside. I'm going to come into, we can get in there. Just want to make sure that I don't go through the back of my felt. I'm almost there. So I'm going to come up in that point, like so. Go, so then my knot is buried. And then I'm going to top stitch all around the inside. So I've top stitched up that first side. Now I'm going to come back and top stitch up this side. And I'm going to continue around until I've done the 4 sides. Then I'll move on to the next one and keep going around. Now when I come to this point up here, I want to make sure that these seams that I folded back behind are still sitting behind, because the stitches that I'm going to do here will catch these folded back seams and secure them in place. So you just want to make sure that they are not poking out again, and if they are, you just need to push them back behind with your needle. And as I do these stitches in this point, they will actually help to secure those folded stitches to the back of the work so that they're not sticking out outside. Those folded seams will create a bit of a bulk in the back, so you just have to persevere with your top stitching as you push your needle up or down and up those folded layers. Now if your thread has come to the end and you're finished and you need to rethread, or you've finished stitching altogether, I'm going to just quickly show you how I tie it off at the back. So at the back of my work, I'm just going to do a knot. I'm going to make sure that knot is right next to, close to the felt. And then what I do is I go sort of underneath that knot and I push my needle underneath the felt, between the felt and the stitching, and pull that through. Pull that nice and tight. And then I will cut that thread right down next to the felt, and that way you've buried your tail end and the knot is nice and neat on the back. Okay, so now we've stitched all around each of the 5 diamonds. It's time to stitch around the outside edge on the edging diamonds. So to do that, the easiest way is to come up not at this point or this point, but at this central point of this diamond. Because you've got all these layers here that we need to make sure that we catch, it's just easier to start here. So I've buried my knot behind my work again, between the diamond and the felt. And again, we're just going to do a running stitch just in from the edge. And we're going to go all the way around the outside edge. We're not going to come and do this bit, we're just going to go around the outside edge. So again, I'm using a Pearl 8 thread. Now you can also use 1 or 2 strands of cotton floss. You could use 12 weight cotton, you could use just a normal sew-all cotton. I like to use the Pearl because it gives a nice defined top stitch. You could even use metallic thread. It just depends how much you want that top stitching to either stand out or blend in. You can colour match your thread, you can use variegated or solid. It's just up to you what you decide. Now as I come to this point where we've folded all those seams back down, again I just want to make sure that those seams are hidden behind and they're not poking out, because as I do my top stitch I'm going to catch those seams so that they stay securely behind the work. And I want to do my last stitch as close to into this point as I can. Don't have to go all the way in, but just nice and close. And then I'm going to come around and I'm going to start at the nice and close in the point of the next diamond, and again making sure those seams are folded and out of the way. Do my top stitch coming back down. So I'll continue all the way around like that, doing my top stitch. Okay, so now I have completely top stitched all the way around onto the felt. So now it's time to trim away the excess felt. So what we do for that is you're going to get your fabric scissors and you're just going to leave about 1/8 of an inch of the felt showing and just trim around. Making sure that you get nice and even all the way around. Okay, and so there you have it. You've got your finished coaster. So you could make sets of these. They make great gifts. So you could make them all scrappy with scrappy stars, like these kind of scrappy stars, or you could do a set of 4 the same, or a set of 4 different ones that coordinate. But yeah, a nice, really quick, simple little gift, and just perfect for your mug or teacup. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and found it helpful. Just a reminder that in the description below I will have links to my shop where you can purchase diamond paper templates, and I'll also have a link to my website where there'll be a written version of the tutorial you've watched today, and I'll also put a link to where you can find a free pattern sheet to make this block. Okay, so if you've enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, please do like, and if you could subscribe, that would be fabulous, because that just helps more people find this tutorial, and then more people will learn how to make these beautiful stars. And if you have any questions at all regarding this tutorial or anything else, please do leave them in the comments below, or you can go to my website where I've got a contact form as well. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again soon. Happy stitching!